environment that that community created.
Maybe it's about collaboration between you know, as it was mentioned, medical staff, psychologists, even cleaners, you know, whoever, the principal. So the whole faculty, all the people who work in school, and their collaborative effect should you know, create a kind of atmosphere in which such students will be understood and supported, something like that.
Sure. I think one of the keys for me in this particular TED Talk was, she said the first thing they did was got together and talked about what skills they all had. Mm-hmm. And how those skills could best be put towards working with the woman to recover herself, right? So very much, as you said, in terms of schools, what skills does everyone have that can be put towards making sure that the students have a safe and comfortable environment? Everybody is talented, everybody has skills. Many of us aren't using all of our skills in the school environment.
Mm-hmm. I would like to add, maybe not deeply connected with this topic, I had experience when we work at camp, we have this teamwork, and no, it's not school children with trauma, just ordinary school children, but we had less work and more time for our rest, because each group of children knows that not only the teacher can say something, but all team. That's why discipline was very good, and we have enough good time for rest after they go to bed. Yes.
Great example. Great example. Okay. So again, this information came from traumasensitiveschools.org. This was the information I mentioned earlier. That was the Massachusetts Advocates for Children and Harvard Law School. This is their website for working with kids or children who have been in trauma. Okay, so we move on to, I think now, the third section with the very little time that we have left. And we are looking at our trauma-sensitive selves, and we revisit the term compassion fatigue to define it. Compassion fatigue is basically when we take on other people's problems as our own. Mm-hmm. And so you see it a lot with aid workers who are working in very difficult circumstances, where they begin to feel the same upset that their students or the other people that they're working with feel because they are connecting emotionally with them, right? The teachers, we do this as well. We may not know that it is called compassion fatigue, but I'm sure that most of us have experienced this at some point in time with a student who has come to us for help about something that was not necessarily related to school, but about personal things. So one of the things that we have to think about when we think about compassion fatigue is pretty much it will happen. So how do we deal with our own feelings, or how do we deal with our own trauma? Because as I mentioned earlier, in terms of trauma, we have it as well, right? It's not just other people. So something could happen in our lives where we lose someone suddenly, or a violent incident occurs and we are not recovering from it as much as, or as quickly as we would like. So how do we overcome that? So we can look first at Viktor Frankl's principles, and putting them in practice, they would look something like this. So he was the one who I mentioned, the book Man's Search for Meaning. The first one, exercise our personal freedom to choose our outlook or attitude. So part of this is based on the ability to reflect on our thoughts and on our emotions. So taking a step back and adding some perspective, or looking at ourselves from a distance, and realize that while we may feel anger right now, as the more we reflect on it and the more that we take a step back and look at it, maybe from a different perspective, the more we're able to work through the anger, right? And so we can then choose how we would like to talk about, or how we would like to feel about that experience. This also works with fear. The story that I told yesterday to one of the participants was when I was working in Afghanistan, in Kabul, we had an attack that occurred on Parliament while I was there. I was in the middle of class. I was just about to give the homework, and someone came into the room and was like, you need to go right now. And to make a long story short, I left and we went to the safe area. And we figured out that the fighting was happening on the other side of town, and it may be okay for us to take a car to our house. And so the woman that lived across the hall from me, we were like, we need to go. Because if we wait, it could get worse. And if it gets worse, that means we're staying at the university indefinitely. So we took a risk and we went. They had shut off the road because there was fighting on the road to the apartment, the normal one that we took. So our driver worked miracles and was able to find another road for us to use. I get to the apartment and I can hear like gunshots in the background. I can hear like RPFs going. These are the rockets, rocket propelled grenades and stuff like that. I should say RPGs. And I'm looking at the walls of my house and they're all glass. And I'm thinking, I'm really scared because I'm like, if something lands nearby, all the glass will come inside and I will have no chance, right? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So of course I call my best friend and I'm like, Nihar, what do I do? Like, my place is all full of glass, and when I'm on the phone with him, I can hear like these grenades going off very close to him because he's in their bunker underground, because he was at the British Embassy and they were actually being attacked. And so he's like, you know, so tell me about the layout of your house, tell me about this, tell me about that. And he was like, okay, so what I want you to do is get in the bathtub and stay in the bathtub until all of the action stops. And then it was silent. And I was like, Nihar, and he was not there. And I got really scared because I was like, I really hope that was not my last conversation, right? He's like, get in the bathtub. Boom. And so, to make a long story short, like, I'm trying really not to traumatize you, but I'm telling it, I hope, with humor. Because it was a very traumatic moment in my life, but when I look back now, thinking about all of the things that happened, like get in the bathtub for 12 hours, it's funny. You know, but you have to be able to choose the attitude and to reflect on the experience from distance in order to get to the point where you can tell the story with hopefully more humor than when it was actually happening, right? And maybe I'm not such a good storyteller because none of you laughed, but that was the idea behind the story, okay? So also we have don't work against ourselves, and basically what this is referring to is we all have self-talk. This self-talk occurs inside, right? And it's the self-talk that compares ourselves with our friends, our family, other people. So basically that self-talk is not helpful most of the time, right? When we're comparing, we're judging, and judgment doesn't help us. So not to do that when we're in a situation. Like, make sure that we are trying to not think like, well, how come he went through this situation and he's fine and I'm not? Just be with what happened, how you feel about it, and work through the emotions, right? Don't try to numb the emotions or hide from the emotions. Okay. Define and redefine. Sometimes meaning changes. Sometimes. Sometimes it stays the same. But constantly looking at yourself, what you're going through, and what you're surrounded with in life to make sure, are you having meaningful and significant encounters or not? Is your job meaningful? If not, how can you make it meaningful? How can you search for areas that will add more meaning to your work? Right? Because we can't always change our work. Sometimes we have to change the way that we look at our work. Reflect on life and draw conclusions, and extend beyond yourself is basically try to help others. You know, whether it be volunteering or even something simple like, you know, helping an older person cross the street when they look like they can't make it, or they look like they're really traumatized, if you will, about crossing the street. So, teaching self-care. This information that I'm about to give you comes from the Headington Institute, which is what I mentioned earlier. It's a group of psychologists that work specifically for aid workers, but all of this is relevant to ourselves as well, because this is the same in the literature I've looked at for teacher self-care.